He survived everything. He survived the First World War. He survived the invasion of Poland. He survived the fall of France. He survived the Eastern Front. He survived the drive to Moscow. He survived being fired by Hitler. Twice. He survived the entire war from the first shot to almost the very last. And then on May 4th, 1945, 4 days before Germany surrendered, a British aircraft dropped a bomb on a road in northern Germany. And Fedor von Bock, one of the most senior and most experienced commanders in the entire Wehrmacht, died in a ditch beside a destroyed car. 4 days. If he had survived 4 more days, he would have lived to see the end. He did not get 4 more days. This is his story. Fedor von Bock was born on December 3, 1880, in Kustrin, a fortress town in what was then the Kingdom of Prussia. He came from exactly the kind of family you would expect to produce a Prussian Field Marshal. Military family. Multiple generations of officers. His father was a general. His grandfather was an officer. Service to Prussia and then to Germany was not a career choice for the von Bock family. It was a biological inheritance, a destiny written into the family name. He entered the Prussian military academy as a boy and never looked back. By the time he was a young man, he had already decided everything about his life. He was going to be a soldier. He was going to be the best soldier he could possibly be. And he was going to serve Germany with everything he had. He served in the First World War as a staff officer and then as a frontline commander. He was decorated for extraordinary bravery, receiving the Pour le Mérite, the highest military decoration in the Imperial German Army, nicknamed the Blue Max. This was not given lightly. This was given to men who had demonstrated exceptional courage and leadership under fire. Von Bock earned it. He came home in 1918 to a defeated Germany, to the humiliation of Versailles, to the collapse of the empire that had defined everything he believed in. And like the professional soldier he was, he stayed in the army. He stayed in the tiny Reichswehr that the Versailles Treaty permitted Germany to maintain. He kept his head down. He trained. He waited. When Hitler came to power in 1933 and began rebuilding German military strength, von Bock was perfectly positioned. He was one of the most experienced and capable senior officers in the German army. He was not a Nazi. He never joined the party. He was an old Prussian professional who found Hitler personally distasteful in many of the same ways that other aristocratic officers did. But he served. Because serving was what he did. Because the alternative was unthinkable for a man like von Bock. You did not refuse. You did not resign. You put on the uniform and you did your job. And he was exceptionally good at his job. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, von Bock commanded Army Group North, one of the 2 great armored pincers that crushed Polish resistance in 5 weeks. He coordinated massive movements of men and machines across hundreds of miles with a professional competence that was immediately recognized by his superiors. Poland fell, and von Bock moved on to the next campaign, France, in May 1940. Von Bock commanded Army Group B, the force that drove through Belgium and the Netherlands in the famous diversionary attack that drew Allied attention while the real blow fell through the Ardennes further south. His army group crashed through Dutch and Belgian defenses, pushed the British Expeditionary Force and French armies back toward the coast, and played a central role in one of the most stunning military victories in modern history. France fell in 6 weeks. Von Bock was promoted to Field Marshal on July 19, 1940, one of 12 men promoted on the same day in Hitler's grand celebration of victory. But here is something about von Bock that is important to understand. He was not just a professional soldier following orders passively. He was an aggressive and ambitious commander who pushed his forces hard and who sought victory with genuine personal intensity. His nickname among his men was Der Sterber, which translates roughly as the one who courts death, a reference to his willingness to place himself in dangerous situations and to demand the same of his men. He was not a distant administrator of war. He was a man who genuinely wanted to win, and who drove himself and everyone around him toward that goal with relentless intensity. And then came the Eastern Front, Operation Barbarossa, June 22, 1941, the largest military operation in human history. Von Bock was given command of Army Group Center, the most powerful of the three great German army groups that drove into the Soviet Union. His was the central thrust, aimed directly at Moscow, the heart of the Soviet state. If any of the three army groups was going to deal the decisive blow that destroyed the Soviet Union, it was supposed to be von Bock's. The early months were breathtaking in their speed and violence. Army Group Center drove deep into Soviet territory at a pace that seemed to confirm every German assumption about Soviet weakness. Massive Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed in battles of encirclement that became the largest in military history. At Minsk and then at Smolensk, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped and captured. The numbers were staggering. The Soviet Union was absorbing losses that would have destroyed any army Germany had ever fought before. And it kept fighting. Here we must stop and confront something directly. Because the advance of Army Group Center was not just a military campaign. Behind von Bock's advancing forces came the killing units, the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile death squads that murdered Jewish civilians, Soviet commissars, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Reich in the occupied territories. Army Group Center's advance created the space within which these murders occurred. The territory that von Bock's forces conquered became the territory where some of the worst massacres of the entire Holocaust took place. Von Bock knew about the Einsatzgruppen. Every senior commander on the Eastern Front knew. And like virtually every other senior Wehrmacht commander, he raised no serious objection. He looked away. He focused on his maps and his operational objectives. And that looking away made him part of the system. By October 1941, Army Group Center was close to Moscow. Operation Typhoon, the final drive on the Soviet capital, had begun. German forces were close enough to see the spires of the Kremlin on clear days. Stalin briefly considered evacuating the city. The Soviet government partially relocated eastward. It seemed, for a brief, terrifying moment, like Moscow might actually fall. It did not fall. The German advance ground to a halt in the mud of the autumn Rasputitsa, the season of rain and thaw, when Russian roads turned to impassable mud. And then the winter came. A winter of ferocious cold that German forces were completely unprepared for. Soldiers who had been told they would be home before the snow fell were now dying of frostbite in summer uniforms, while Soviet forces in proper winter equipment launched massive counteroffensives. Army Group Center was pushed back from Moscow in the brutal fighting of December 1941 and January 1942. The dream of a quick victory in the East was dead. Von Bock argued with Hitler about tactics throughout this period. He believed in the need for strategic withdrawals to preserve his forces. Hitler believed in holding ground at all costs. The two men clashed repeatedly, and in December 1941, citing health reasons, von Bock was relieved of command of Army Group Center. He was sick, that much was true, but the clash with Hitler over strategy had not helped his position. He was not finished. In January 1942, he was given command of Army Group South, replacing Field Marshal von Reichenau, who had died of a stroke. He commanded Army Group South through the opening phases of the massive 1942 summer offensive, the drive toward the Caucasus oil fields and the Volga River. This was the offensive that eventually led to Stalingrad. Von Bock was involved in planning the operation and commanding its initial phases, but he clashed with Hitler again over strategy, again arguing for approaches that Hitler rejected. In July 1942, he was relieved of command for the second and final time. He was placed in the Führer Reserve, the pool of senior officers available for reassignment. The assignment never came. For the remaining nearly 3 years of the war, von Bock had no command. He was one of the most experienced military minds in Germany, a decorated Field Marshal with a career spanning both world wars, and he sat at home while Germany fought and lost the most catastrophic war in its history. He watched from the outside as the campaigns he had participated in reversed themselves. The Soviet Union that his armies had almost destroyed pushed back with overwhelming force. The Western Allies landed in North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, then Normandy. Germany was being crushed from every direction. He was not involved in the July 20th, 1944 plot to assassinate Hitler. He was not a member of the resistance in any meaningful sense. He was a professional soldier who had served the regime faithfully and had been discarded when his strategic judgment conflicted with Hitler's wishes. He spent the war's final years in a kind of bitter retirement, a man defined entirely by military command who had no command, watching the country he had served his entire life collapse around him. By early 1945, the end was clearly only weeks away. Allied forces were crossing into Germany from the west. Soviet forces were driving toward Berlin from the east. Germany was being dismembered. Von Bock was in the Schleswig-Holstein region of northern Germany, in the path of the British advance. On May 4, 1945, he was traveling by car with his wife and his stepdaughter on a road near the town of Kielbasen. British aircraft were flying over the area. A bomb fell. The car was destroyed. Fedor von Bock, his wife, and his stepdaughter were all killed. 4 days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The timing is almost impossible to process. 4 days. The man who had commanded more German soldiers than almost anyone else in the war. The man who had stood at the gates of Moscow. The man who had been part of the machinery of conquest and occupation that had enabled the murder of millions. He died 4 days before the end. 4 days before he would have had to face whatever reckoning awaited the senior commanders of the Wehrmacht. Would he have been tried? Possibly. The question of Wehrmacht command responsibility for war crimes committed in the occupied territories was complex and contested in the post-war trials. Some senior commanders faced justice. Many did not. Von Bock might have been among those who escaped prosecution entirely, as so many of his colleagues did. We will never know. The British aircraft that killed him on May 4, 1945, made that question permanently unanswerable. Here is what we should take from von Bock's story. He was not an ideological Nazi. He was not a true believer. He found Hitler personally distasteful. He argued with the regime's strategy. He was fired twice for doing so. And yet he served faithfully for 6 years of war. He commanded the armies that conquered Poland and France and drove to the gates of Moscow. He commanded in the territories where the Einsatzgruppen murdered Jewish civilians behind his lines, and he raised no serious objection. He was the professional soldier who made the machinery of Nazi conquest work. Without men like von Bock, the regime could not have done what it did. Professional loyalty divorced from moral judgment is not neutrality. It is complicity. Choosing to serve is a choice. Choosing not to look is a choice. Fedor von Bock made those choices every day of his military career, and he died 4 days before he would have had to answer for them. In the end, even death has its own dark sense of timing.